I was destroyed, like on the ground, like crying. Like because that's a loss. It's a death.
Kelly Clarkson has always been honest with her fans about the hard parts of her life, but nothing could have prepared anyone for the heartbreaking news of her ex-husband's funeral. Brandon Blackstock passed away at just 48 years old, and Kelly Clarkson's tribute broke hearts everywhere as people saw the raw pain behind her words. Even after their painful divorce, she stayed by his side for their children during his final days. How does someone find strength to attend their ex-husband's funeral and honor his memory? What does it take to write a tribute that breaks many hearts while showing pure grace? Join us as we uncover Kelly's story of loss, courage, and a mother's unshakable love. Kelly Clarkson and the pain behind the silence. Kelly Clarkson has always been known as a strong and honest woman, someone who sings from the heart and never hides who she is. From the very beginning of her career, people felt connected to her because she felt real. She laughed loud, cried openly, and spoke the truth, even when it hurt. Her voice carried power, but her honesty carried even more weight. Fans did not just listen to her music, they believed her. Over the years, Kelly became more than just a singer. She became a mother, a talk show host, and a woman who showed the world that success does not mean life is perfect. She talked about love, heartbreak, healing, and starting over. So when she suddenly canceled her Las Vegas studio sessions, people noticed right away. This was not something she did often. Kelly loved performing, and she loved her fans. Walking away from the stage meant something serious was happening. On what would be her final public message before Brandon's passing, Kelly released a heartfelt post to her fans. Unfortunately, I need to postpone the remainder of the August studio session dates in Las Vegas. While I normally keep my personal life private, this past year my children's father has been ill, and at this moment I need to be fully present for them. I am sincerely sorry to everyone who bought tickets to the shows, and I so appreciate your grace, kindness, and understanding. Fans began to worry. Social media filled with messages of concern and support. People reread her statement again and again, trying to understand what she was not saying. Kelly was known for being open, so her silence felt loud. She was protecting something or someone, and that alone spoke volumes. At the time, no one knew just how deep the pain went. The illness she mentioned was not public, and there were no details. Kelly had always tried to keep her children's lives private, and this moment was no different. She was not thinking about headlines or rumors. She was thinking about being a mother first. Everything else came second. Looking back, that message feels different now. It reads like a quiet goodbye, a moment where she knew life was about to change forever. It was not dramatic or emotional on the surface, but it carried the weight of fear, love, and preparation. She was getting ready for something she hoped she would not have to face, but deep down knew was coming. And while fans waited, worried, and hoped for good news, something heartbreaking was unfolding quietly behind closed doors, something that would soon change everything and reveal why Kelly had stepped away when she did. A private goodbye no one saw coming. For days after Kelly's announcement, people wondered what could possibly be going on in her life that was serious enough to make her step away from everything she had worked so hard to build. Fans kept checking her social media, hoping for updates or clues about what was happening. But Kelly stayed completely silent, and that silence felt heavier with each passing day. Some people guessed she might be dealing with health issues, or maybe something had happened with one of her children, but nobody could have imagined the truth that was about to come out and shake everyone who cared about her. Then the news broke, and it hit like a wave of shock and sadness that nobody saw coming. Brandon Blackstock, Kelly's ex-husband and the father of her two children, River and Remy, had passed away after fighting cancer privately for what had been a long and painful battle. He was only 48 years old, still young with so much life that should have been ahead of him, and the news felt impossible to process because nobody even knew he had been sick. The information came from sources close to the family who confirmed that Brandon had been diagnosed with cancer and had chosen to keep his illness completely private, away from the media and the public eye. surrounded only by the people who loved him most during his final days. Suddenly, everything made sense in the most heartbreaking way possible. Kelly's message about stepping away was vague for a reason, and it wasn't because she didn't want to tell people what was happening. She had been protecting her children from having their private pain become public news before they were ready, giving River and Remy space to say goodbye to their father without cameras and questions and strangers watching their grief unfold. Kelly and Brandon had been divorced since 2020 after a marriage that fell apart painfully and publicly, and their split had been messy with court battles over money and custody that lasted for years. Many people assumed they probably weren't on good terms anymore after everything they had been through, all the legal fights and the hurt feelings and the complicated emotions that come with any divorce. But the truth was so different from what people imagined, because even though their marriage ended, Kelly never stopped caring about Brandon as the father of her children and as someone who had once been her partner and best friend. When Brandon became sick and his condition got worse, Kelly didn't turn away or keep her distance like some people might have expected after such a difficult divorce. Instead, she stayed close. She made sure their children could spend time with their dad, and she supported them through every heartbreaking moment of watching someone they loved slip away. Everything she did during those final weeks and days was about protecting River and Remy, making sure they felt safe and loved, while their world was falling apart around them in ways no child should ever have to experience. But what made Kelly choose compassion over bitterness after everything they had been through? And how did she find the strength to put her children's needs above her own hurt feelings? Choosing her children above everything. When a marriage ends badly with lawyers and court fights and years of pain, most people would understand if you wanted nothing to do with your ex-partner anymore and just moved on with your life without looking back. Kelly Clarkson had every reason to feel angry and hurt and bitter after everything that happened between her and Brandon during their divorce, all the battles over money and property and custody that dragged on and made everything so much harder than it needed to be. But Kelly made a choice that showed who she really is at her core. And it wasn't about revenge or holding grudges or making things more difficult just because she could. She chose to be the kind of co-parent who puts her children first no matter what, even when it's hard and uncomfortable and requires swallowing your pride and your hurt feelings. When Brandon got his cancer diagnosis and started getting sicker, Kelly didn't hesitate or think twice about what she needed to do for River and Remy. She made sure they had time with their father. She supported them through every difficult conversation and every scary moment. And she created a space where they could love both of their parents without feeling torn apart or forced to choose sides in some awful battle that wasn't theirs to fight. Friends close to the family have said that Kelly was there during Brandon's final weeks, not because she had to be or because anyone expected it from her, but because she knew her children needed to see their mother being strong and compassionate during the hardest goodbye of their young lives. She wanted River and Remy to remember that even when relationships end and people grow apart and life gets messy and complicated, love doesn't have to turn into hate, and family can still mean something real and important. She showed up for her kids in ways that many divorced parents never managed to do, putting aside her own complicated feelings about Brandon to make sure he wasn't alone, and that their children got to say everything they needed to say before it was too late. Kelly has always talked openly about how much therapy has helped her heal from trauma and pain, and she's been honest about working through the damage that her divorce caused to her mental health and her sense of self-worth. But this was different, because this wasn't about healing her own wounds or processing her own grief. This was about being present for two children who were losing their dad and needed their mom to be stronger than she had ever been before. She had to explain things that no parent wants to explain. She had to answer questions that had no good answers, and she had to watch her babies go through pain she couldn't fix or take away, no matter how badly she wished she could. Every decision Kelly made during those final days was driven by one simple truth that guided everything she did. She would do anything to protect River and Remy from more pain than they absolutely had to feel. But where did this story between Kelly and Brandon really begin? And how did a love that once felt like forever turn into something so complicated and heartbreaking? When love first began. Before all the pain and the court battles and the heartbreak that would eventually tear them apart, Kelly Clarkson and Brandon Blackstock had a love story that felt like something out of a movie, the kind where two people meet and just know they're supposed to be together. Their paths first crossed in the music industry years before they actually got together, back when Brandon was working as a talent manager and Kelly was already a huge star with hit songs and millions of fans who loved everything about her. But timing wasn't right back then. They were both in different places in their lives. And sometimes, the best love stories take years to actually begin, even when the people are right there in front of each other. It wasn't until 2011 that something shifted, and they started seeing each other differently. Not just as colleagues or friends in the same industry, but as two people who had real chemistry and connection that felt electric and exciting. Brandon had been married before, and had two children from his previous relationship, Savannah and Seth, who would later become part of Kelly's blended family when everything came together. Kelly had been through her own heartbreaks and disappointments in relationships, and she had almost given up on finding someone who would really understand her and love her for who she truly was beneath all the fame and success. But with Brandon, everything felt different and right in ways she hadn't experienced before. They got married in October of 2013, in a beautiful ceremony that felt intimate and real and full of hope for the future they were going to build together. Kelly looked so happy in the wedding photos, absolutely glowing with joy and excitement about starting this new chapter of her life with someone she believed was her soulmate and partner in everything. She talked in interviews about how Brandon got her in ways that other people didn't, how he understood the pressure of her career and supported her dreams while also giving her the stability and family life she had always wanted deep down. Soon, they were building a big blended family together with Brandon's two kids from his first marriage and then their own children, River Rose, who was born in 2014, and Remington, who came along in 2016. Kelly embraced being a stepmom to Savannah and Seth, treating them like her own kids, and creating a home where all four children felt loved and valued and part of something special. For a while, life felt full and beautiful, and like everything Kelly had worked so hard for was finally coming together in the most perfect way possible. She posted pictures on social media of family moments and holidays and everyday life that showed how much she loved being a wife and mother, how much joy she found in the chaos of raising four kids and managing her career and trying to balance everything that mattered to her. Brandon seemed supportive and proud of her success, standing beside her at awards shows and events, and from the outside looking in, they appeared to be one of those rare celebrity couples who actually made marriage work, despite all the challenges that come with fame and busy schedules. But beneath the surface of all those happy family photos and public appearances, what was really happening inside their marriage that nobody else could see. The marriage that slowly fell apart. The truth about Kelly and Brandon's marriage is that the cracks started showing up slowly over time, little fractures that grew bigger and deeper until there was no way to pretend everything was fine anymore. From the outside, fans saw a power couple who seemed to have it all figured out with their beautiful blended family and successful careers and life that looked picture perfect on social media. But inside their home and their relationship, things were becoming increasingly difficult and strained in ways that Kelly tried hard to hide from the public eye because she wanted to protect her family's privacy and keep some parts of her life sacred and away from the cameras. One of the biggest problems was that Brandon wasn't just Kelly's husband, he was also her manager, which meant their personal and professional lives were tangled up together in ways that made everything more complicated than it should have been. When you work with your spouse and live with them and try to parent with them all at the same time, there's no separation or space to breathe. And every disagreement about business becomes personal, and every personal issue affects the work relationship too. Kelly has said in interviews after the divorce that mixing marriage with management created a dynamic that wasn't healthy for either of them, where she sometimes felt more like an employee than a partner, and where Brandon's role kept shifting in confusing ways that made it hard to know if he was speaking as her husband or her manager. The lifestyle differences between them also became more obvious as time went on, creating tension that neither of them knew how to fix or talk through properly. Kelly has always been someone who thrives on being busy and creative and working on new projects, touring and recording music, and eventually starting her talk show that became hugely successful. Brandon, on the other hand, wanted a quieter life away from the spotlight, spending time on his ranch in Montana where he could focus on raising cattle and being away from the Hollywood scene that Kelly's career required her to be part of constantly. These weren't small differences that couples could easily compromise on. These were fundamental disagreements about how they each wanted to live their lives and where they saw their futures going. By 2020, Kelly knew in her heart that something had to change because she wasn't happy anymore and hadn't been for a while. If she was being completely honest with herself, the COVID pandemic and lockdown forced them to spend even more time together than usual, trapped in the same house with nowhere to escape to, and that intense closeness made all their problems impossible to ignore or push aside like they had been doing for years. Kelly realized that staying in a marriage that was making her miserable wasn't good for her or for the children, who could definitely sense the tension and unhappiness between their parents, even when Kelly and Brandon tried to hide it. Making the decision to file for divorce in June of 2020 was one of the hardest choices Kelly ever had to make, knowing it would change everything for her kids and her family and her entire life as she knew it. She didn't make the choice lightly or without thinking through all the consequences, but she also knew that sometimes loving yourself and your children means walking away from something that isn't working anymore, no matter how scary that feels. But could Kelly have predicted just how brutal and painful the divorce process would become, or how much it would cost her emotionally and financially? Divorce, battles, and emotional damage. When Kelly filed for divorce in June of 2020, she probably hoped it would be a clean break where both sides could be reasonable adults and work things out fairly for the sake of their children. But what actually happened was nothing like that peaceful vision, and instead, the divorce turned into a long and brutal legal battle that dragged on for years and left deep emotional scars that Kelly is probably still healing from even now. The court fights were exhausting and draining in every possible way, taking up so much of her mental and emotional energy when she was also trying to work and raise 4 kids and pretend like everything was okay on her talk show, where millions of people watched her smile every single day. The financial side of the divorce became especially complicated and nasty, with fights over money and property and assets that seemed to go on forever without any resolution in sight. Brandon was asking for enormous amounts in spousal support, claiming he deserved over $400,000 per month to maintain the lifestyle he had become accustomed to during their marriage. Kelly had to pay huge legal fees while also continuing to support her family and manage all her business responsibilities. And the whole process felt like it was never going to end, no matter how many court dates and mediations and negotiations happened. There were battles over their Montana ranch that Brandon loved so much, disputes about who owned what and who deserved what percentage of everything they had built together during their 7 years of marriage. But even more painful than the money fights were the custody battles over River and Remy, which cut Kelly deeper than anything else because her children mean absolutely everything to her. She fought hard to keep her kids with her in Los Angeles, where they had their schools and friends and stability, while Brandon wanted them spending significant time in Montana on his ranch away from the city life Kelly needed for her career. Every court appearance about custody felt like someone was questioning her abilities as a mother, and that hurt in ways that money disputes never could, because being a good mom has always been the most important part of Kelly's identity and sense of self-worth. Kelly has been incredibly open and honest about how much the divorce damaged her mental health and forced her to really lean into therapy to survive the darkest moments. She's talked on her show and in interviews about how she had to work through feelings of failure and guilt about her marriage ending, wondering if she could have done things differently or tried harder to make it work. The therapy helped her understand that sometimes relationships end not because anyone did something terribly wrong, but because 2 people grew apart and wanted different things from life, and that choosing to leave an unhappy situation doesn't make you weak or a failure, but actually takes tremendous courage and strength. Through all the legal battles and emotional pain, Kelly kept showing up for her kids and her work, putting on a brave face even when she was falling apart inside and didn't know how she would make it through another day of fighting and stress. But how does someone turn all that pain and heartbreak into something beautiful? And what did Kelly do with all those broken pieces of her heart? Turning heartbreak into music again. Kelly Clarkson has always been the kind of artist who writes from her soul and pours every bit of her real emotions into her music, never holding back or pretending to feel things she doesn't actually feel. Throughout her entire career since winning American Idol more than 20 years ago, her best and most powerful songs have come from places of genuine pain and joy and heartbreak and triumph that she's experienced in her own life. So when her marriage fell apart and the divorce became this long and exhausting battle that consumed years of her life, everyone who knew Kelly's music and understood how she creates knew that eventually all that pain would have to come out in the form of songs that would break people's hearts and help them heal at the same time. That's exactly what happened when she released her album Chemistry in 2023, a collection of songs that came directly from everything she went through during and after her divorce from Brandon. The album was raw and honest, and sometimes angry and sometimes heartbroken, showing every stage of grief and healing that Kelly experienced while trying to rebuild her life and figure out who she was outside of being Brandon's wife. She didn't sugarcoat anything or try to make the divorce sound prettier than it actually was. And fans loved her even more for being so vulnerable and real about the mess and pain of watching a marriage die slowly and then having to pick up the pieces afterward. Songs on Chemistry talked about feeling betrayed and disappointed and lost, about questioning yourself and wondering if you'll ever be able to trust anyone again after someone you loved so completely let you down. But the album also had moments of hope and strength and realization that maybe ending something that wasn't working was actually the bravest and most loving thing Kelly could have done for herself and her children. Writing those songs became therapy in itself, a way for Kelly to process emotions that were too big and complicated to just talk about in regular conversations. And the music gave her fans who were going through their own divorces and heartbreaks a soundtrack that made them feel less alone. After Brandon passed away in early 2025, friends and people close to Kelly have said that she returned to songwriting again as a way to cope with this new and different kind of grief. Losing someone you were once married to and shared children with is complicated in ways that most people can't fully understand, because you're mourning not just the person who died, but also all the complicated history and unresolved feelings and the future your kids won't get to have with their father. The songs Kelly is reportedly writing now are said to be even more raw and emotional than anything she's done before, dealing with themes of forgiveness and regret, and finding peace with someone's memory after they're gone. Writing has always been Kelly's way of surviving the impossible moments in life, the times when talking isn't enough, and the feelings are too overwhelming to process in any normal way. Music gave her a place to put all the broken pieces of her heart, where they could exist as something beautiful instead of just painful, where her suffering could maybe help someone else feel understood and less alone in their own darkness. But after all the pain and loss and heartbreak Kelly has survived, where does she find herself now, and what does the future look like for her and her children? Strength after loss. Today, Kelly Clarkson lives her life quietly and carefully, keeping most of her personal world private in ways she never used to do before, because she's learned that some pain is too sacred and too deep to share with millions of strangers on the internet. She focuses on what matters most, which is being present for River and Remy as they navigate their grief and try to understand a world where their father is gone forever and never coming back, no matter how much they wish things could be different. Kelly knows her children are watching how she handles this loss and that she has to model strength and grace even on the days when getting out of bed feels impossible and the weight of everything is almost too much to bear. Her fans have continued to surround her with incredible amounts of love and support, sending messages and comments that remind her she's not alone, even when the grief feels isolating and overwhelming. They respect her silence and her need for privacy, while also letting her know they're there whenever she's ready to share more of herself again. And that kind of unconditional support means everything to someone going through the darkest chapter of their life. Kelly hasn't returned to performing yet, and nobody knows exactly when she will. But her fans are patient and understanding because they know that healing can't be rushed, and some things are more important than concerts and entertainment. Brandon Blackstock's memory lives on through his children, who carry pieces of him in their faces and personalities and the way they move through the world. River and Remy will grow up knowing their father loved them even though he's gone, and they'll have Kelly there to make sure they never forget the good parts of who Brandon was before illness took him away from them too soon. Kelly's story isn't just about loss and divorce and heartbreak, even though those things are huge parts of what she's been through in recent years. Her story is really about survival and resilience and choosing to keep going even when everything inside you wants to give up and stop trying. It's about telling the truth even when it's messy and painful, about protecting the people you love even when it costs you everything, and about finding strength you didn't know you had when life demands more from you than you thought was humanly possible. Kelly Clarkson is still standing, still breathing, still being a mother, and that alone is proof of how incredibly strong the human heart can be. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and also click the next video shown on your screen.